Hi friends, welcome to another video. In this video, we are going to talk about Azure Storage Account. So this is just an introduction. I'll talk about what are the different components on a storage account, and then I'll show you a demo on how to actually create a storage account. So a storage account is nothing but it is a service which helps you to store your data, and it can consist of a lot of different options available within it. You can store your blobs, files, you can store your queues, tables, disk, and data lake. All of these offerings are part of a storage account. So it can store unstructured data, it can store structured data, it can store queues or messages. All those options can be stored over here. And all these storage endpoints can be accessed over the internet. So you have the opportunity to create like a HTTPS endpoint, and you can get access to a storage account over that HTTP endpoint. So a storage account is a massively durable, highly available, secure, and massively scalable as well. So this service consists of all the industry standards that you get with a managed service available to you. So when you talk about a storage account, it has various components within it. So storage account is created within a subscription, which is your billing boundary. You have a resource group where this is like a container. Inside this container, you can have like storage accounts, virtual machines, and all the resources stored inside it. This. Now, inside a storage account, you have different components that are available to you. So you have containers, you have files, you have queues, and you have tables. You also have another service called data lake. I've not mentioned it over here, but that service is used for big data analysis. So if you talk about containers, what are the different components within a container? So in a container, when you upload any file, it is called as blob or binary large object. So what exactly is a blob? A blob is nothing but it is unstructured data that is available to you. So this data can be images, audio files, videos, documents, any big data solution that you want hosting, backup, logs, databases. All these things can actually be stored in a container. Now, when you talk about blobs, there are three types of blobs available to you. First one is the page blob. Page blob is good for paging operations. So if you're creating a virtual hard disk, or if you want to run like anything related to like disk operations. So it is really good for those kind of data. So if you want to store virtual hard disk, then page blob will be the best option for you. Then you have blob, which divides a larger chunk of data into smaller chunks, and it creates those blocks for you. So if you use a blob, you can get like a 64 KB block, or you can get like a 100 MB block, depending on your requirement. And using those blocks, you are storing like images, videos, audios, all that kind of data is stored in a blob. And the third option is append blob, which is used to store log files. So it only supports append operations. It will not allow you to modify the data. It only adds more data to your blob. So that's why it is called as append blob. So you have all these options available to you when you're configuring a container. Besides the container, you have a file share option available to you, which is like a file share that you create on premises. Very similar to that, you have a file service on Azure. It supports NFS as well as SMB protocol, and it is multi-platform. You can attach this files to a Windows machine, to a Linux machine, or to a Mac OS. So the same file share can be attached to all three different platforms available to you. These two services are more infra specific. So if you are working as an admin, you will be working with these services a lot. But if you're a developer, the developer will definitely work with queues and tables. So if you talk about queues, this is a messaging service available to you. If you want to create like a decoupled architecture, you want to create like a web app, and you want to create like a queue service, and all the requests are stored as messages, and one by one these messages are processed by your web app, and then it goes to, let's say, another queue, and from that queue this message is sent to your database. All that can be configured by using this queue service. So this is more aligned towards those solutions. Then you also have a table service, which is used to store like NoSQL tables. Maybe you want to store books in a library. So you can provide a name, book ID, category, tag related to it, and this can be used for that kind of a use case. So you have all these services available to you when you create a storage account. Now let's see where you actually see these options available to you. If you go to your Azure portal, you can go to a storage account. You can just search for a storage account. If you search for a storage account, it will take you to the same page where I am currently. You click on create, and once you click on create, you get the opportunity to define the subscription and the resource group where you want to store your storage account. So I can select my billing boundary and I can select where I want to store this storage account. So you basically assign it to a resource group. After that, you provide a name of your storage account. I can define, let's say if I type only 2 words, it will not take those characters. It has to be from 3 to 24 characters. It has to be lowercase and numbers, and it has to be globally unique. So if I type, let's say storage, most likely this will be taken by someone. So this is already taken. So you have to define a storage account name, which is globally unique. Storage test, this is also taken. Demo 0978. This is a unique enough name, and this name I can use for my storage account. You also define a region where you want to deploy the storage account. Depending on where your users are connecting to the storage account, you will try to keep this region very similar to where your users are based out of or your applications are placed. Then you select the performance. Standard performance will give you good enough IOPS for a lightly used production workload. But if you have a requirement where you require very high IOPS, you're going to go with the premium tier. In case of premium tier, you get 3 options. You can create page blob, or file shares. So if you want very high operations for paging, you will go for page blobs and premium tier in this. If you want very big file shares, you want to create like 100 TB of file shares, and you want high performance file shares, maybe for a SAP HANA workload, then you're going to go with this file shares over here. Blob is good for operations where you want very high transaction rates and very low latency. So you have all 3 options when you select premium storage. Standard storage supports all the different options that we had talked about. Like it supports files, blobs, queues, and tables. All of them are supported on a standard storage. So if I want very good IOPS, I'm going to go with premium storage. But there are considerations why you will go with standard or premium performance. If I go with standard performance, I get multiple redundancy option. So I can replicate my storage account to different areas. In case of LRS, I can replicate my storage account 3 times within the same data center. In GRS, there are 6 copies of my data replicated across 2 different regions, 3 copies in the primary region and 3 copies in the secondary region. I also have ZRS, which is basically replicating 3 copies of your data across multiple availability zone within the same region. And then you have GZRS, which is a combination of GRS and ZRS. Basically, it is replicating 3 copies of my data across different availability zone in the primary region, and it is also replicating my data asynchronously in the secondary region. There will always be some delay in which your data will be available in the secondary region. So maybe there might be like 2-3 minute delay before the data is actually updated in the secondary region. So you have all these redundancy option where I select the standard performance. But if I select premium, you will see you'll only get LRS and GRS. No matter what option you select, page blob or file shares, or if I select maybe block blobs, I only get LRS and GRS options available to me. So my data is only replicated within one region. I can't replicate my data to a secondary region. That's not possible. So these are some of the redundancy options. If you want me to create a detailed video on it, definitely let me know in the comments or chat. I'll definitely look at that. Now, if I go to advanced settings, you get security by default. So by default, all the data is encrypted in transit by using HTTPS. This is enabled for you. Public access on containers are also allowed by default, which is not a good security practice. Usually you will want a private access to these containers. So maybe you can disable this one. Then if you want to access a storage account, you get a storage account access key. Just like you enter your home, you use a key to enter your home, right? Similarly, if you want to enter or use a storage account, you can access it via access key. But this is usually not the best practice to use. If you want to secure your storage account, usually you will go with the second option, which is Active Directory authentication. With Active Directory, you get a lot of other security benefits, like you can use MFA and you have multiple authentication options and security options that will be configured for you when you use this authorization. So this is recommended in comparison to maybe using a storage access key. Okay, now you have minimum TLS version, always go with the latest or the highest version. And you have another option to what copy operations you want to define. So permitted scope for copy operations. I can copy from any storage account. I can only copy from storage account within my Azure AD tenant, or I can copy from storage account that have private endpoint configured and are connected to the same network. So if you define these settings, you can only copy data from certain storage accounts. So this is a new feature and it is currently in preview, which is available to you over here. If you want to store large amount of data for big data analysis, you can also enable data lake storage Gen 2 in this. It provides you a hierarchical namespace. So it is just like a file system available to you. And using that file system, it becomes very easy for you to do big data analysis. So along with the unstructured data, you can also store hierarchical data if you enable this option. Once you enable this option, SFTP and NFS v3 version are also available to you. If I disable this, I also have the opportunity to allow cross-tenant replication. If I enable this option, what it does, it basically allows you to copy blobs to destination storage account in a different tenant. If you don't enable this option, it will not allow you to replicate your data from one tenant to the other tenant. So you have another option available to you. Also, you have option to enable large file share. Depending on the options you have selected prior to this, you will get this option to enable large file shares. So if I want like 100 TB of file share, I can enable this option. So I'll have to go back and maybe select like premium tier in order to see this feature. Okay. Then how do you want to access your storage account? I can access my storage account over the internet or public endpoint. I can only access it from certain networks or certain IP addresses, or I can only allow access over private endpoints. So usually this is the most secure option. And then you have to configure a private endpoint and you only connect to the storage account from that private endpoint. You can also select like Microsoft routing. Depending on the options you have selected, you can also select internet routing. Internet routing is a bit cheaper, but if you talk about security, Microsoft routing is the one that you're going to prefer. Now, I also have data protection option. I can configure point-in-time restore for my containers. So if I want to restore my containers, I have to enable versioning, change feed, and all of these options. And maybe let's say if I have lost some data at 3 p.m., I can go back to the last available copy for me. So it can basically create multiple snapshots of your data, and you can basically go back to a specific version of your blob by using this point-in-time restore. If I accidentally delete some storage account and later I found out that this is very important for me, I have a soft delete option available to me. So if I delete a blob, if I delete a container, if I delete a file share, I can enable soft delete in order for me to recover that data within these number of days that I've defined over here. I can also enable tracking, so I can create multiple versions of my blob. I can also audit my blobs. So if whatever I'm doing, if I'm performing any CRUD operation, create, read, update, delete, all those operations can be captured from here. I can also configure access control. So what I can do, I can define that my data has to be retained for 1 year or 3 years. I can create time-based retention policies, or I can configure legal hold. Time-based retention policies are used when you want to retain the data for 1 year or 2 year or 3 year. You know the time. Legal hold can be used in order to retain the data for unknown periods of time, maybe 20 days or 50 days or 100 days. You cannot modify the data which is put under this immutability. So you are only able to read the data, but you're not able to modify that data. So you have that option available to you. You also have encryption option. You can use Microsoft keys or customer managed key to encrypt your data. I can also enable encryption on my blobs and all the other services as well. Also, I have option to enable double encryption. So if I want to enable another encryption at an infrastructure level, I can enable infrastructure encryption over here as well. This will provide me double encryption on my storage account. So these are all the major options available to you when you talk about a storage account. If you want me to deep dive into certain areas, do let me know in the comment section and I'll make sure I create a video on the same.